The Sikha we will be learning will be the second Sikha of Parsha Shmini, Lekutei Sichas Chelik Chov Zayin. It talks about the korbanos that they brought on Yom Shmini LeMiluyim, the eighth day of the Miluyim, which means like this. First, there were 7 days of Miluyim. When they put up the Mishkan, they put up the Mishkan temporarily every day for 7 days, and there's certain korbanos they had to bring. And then on the eighth day, which was Resh Chodesh Nisan, they put up the Mishkan to stand permanently till they were traveling again, but it was stand. The other 7 days, they took it apart every day and they put it on again the next day. So on the Shmini LeMiluyim, the eighth day of the Miluyim, they brought different korbanos special for that day. Amongst the korbanos that they brought, so one of them was, it's called a Seirizim, a goat that they brought as a chatos. But then there were other two chatoyas that they brought, two korbanos chatos that they brought for different reasons. One is because that day was the beginning of when the Nesiim of every Shevet for 12 days brought special korbanos. This was the Chanukas HaMizbeach. So on the first day, he started Resh Chodesh Nisan. Nachshon brought, Nachshon ben Aminod of the Nosi of Shevet Yehuda. So that's another chatos. So one chatos was the chatos in special connection to the Shem Shmini LeMiluyim. Another chatos was the chatos of Nachshon, which was a Seir chatos that he had to bring amongst his korbanos, was a korban chatos, which is a soy chatos, second chatos. And the third chatos was because it was Rosh Chodesh, every Rosh Chodesh you had to bring this chatos for all the generations later. So there was a third chatos. Another thing that happened on that day was that Nadav Avihu, the two sons of Aaron, passed away. Ubemele, Aaron and his children became Einanim. We know that a day when a relative passes away, a relative who you are obligated to be an oval for, like a father, a mother, etc., you become an Einan till after the Kvura, till after you bury, you become an Einan. There is a din, an Einan is not allowed to eat kochim, not allowed to eat korbanos. So a Kayan who's an Einan is not allowed to eat korbanos. So here, it would seem that Aaron and his children are not allowed to eat from the korbanos that he brought that day because it was after they became Einanim. Nevertheless, the Eibishter said clearly, as Rashi says, the Rebbe will bring it, Kain Savesia, Moshe Rabbeinu was commanded by Hashem that the korban of the Seirizim, which was a special korban of that day because it was the Yom HaShmini LeMiluyim, and the korban of Nachshon, the soyer of Nachshon, should be eaten even though they are Einanim. Concerning the third korban, the korban of the soyer, the chatas of Rosh Chodesh, the Eibishter didn't say anything. So what Aaron and his children did, the two that Hashem said to eat, they ate, even though they were Einanim, because Hashem commanded that they should eat, even though they're Einanim. The third one, which was the soyer that was the chatas of Rosh Chodesh, they didn't eat, because they were Einanim, so they didn't eat, and there was no commandment for it, that they should eat, so they didn't eat. Moshe Rabbeinu found out about it, and he was upset. So let's read the Sikh inside. Concerning the Soir Chatos, we'll see in a second which one it was, and as I said, it was the Chatos of Rosh Chodesh. Moshe looked into it and he saw it was burnt, which means they didn't eat it. So Zogen Chazal, the Chachamim tell us, as B'Shmini LeMiluyim at Mamakiv given Shleish Asir Chatois, on this eighth day of the Miluyim, they were makriv, they sacrificed 3 seirim, 3 goats, and they each one chatos. That was the seirizim, the goat, the regular goat that was for the inyan of the Yom Shmini LeMiluyim. The soyer Nachshon, the soyer of Nachshon, the Nosi that brought the korbanos that day, the first one of the 12 Nesim in the 12 days, when he was the first one, brought his korban chatos, and there was the soyer Rosh Chodesh, and the soyer that was brought as a chatos because it was Rosh Chodesh. And from all 3, only the one of Rosh Chodesh, the soyer Rosh Chodesh, was burnt and not eaten by them. And the fire is by Yiksef, therefore Moshe was angry, and he said, Madua le'achaltem as a chatos, why didn't you eat that chatos? Just like you ate the other two chatos, you should have eaten this chatos also. And Aaron at him geantwortet, Aaron answered him and said like this, Hey na yeh mikrivas chatosim. Well, today they were makriv the korban chatos. V'atikrani, and this happened to me. I became an einan. V'achalti chatas hayim, had I eaten this chatas today, hayita bein Hashem, would Hashem be happy? In other words, he explained to him that he felt that he's right by not eating that chatas because he's a naina. Vayishma Moshe vayita bein. The Moshe heard and he liked it and he said, "You're right." Moshe agreed that you're right for not eating the chatos of Rosh Chodesh. So here we have Moshe Rabbeinu's thought l'chatchila they should have eaten that chatas also. Lepeil, after Aaron explained it to him, he agreed that it's good that he didn't eat that chatas. Now we have to understand what's the reasoning behind this whole discussion. Eine von der Hasboras Chazal, in Gemara's Vachim, the Chazal explain the shaklav v'taydit zwischen Moshe and Aaron. This discussion between Moshe and Aaron, Tzima hat Soyer Shchedesh gedarft essen, whether the Soyer of Shchedesh should have eaten it, like Kasal Kedaitach for Moshe, like Moshe thought in the beginning, or for Brennan, or they should not eat and burn it, Kedas Aaron, like Aaron thought. What's the logic? What's the Soyer this way, that way? And the Gemara explains it like this. Aaron don't give the Mises not of Aviv. Because not of Aviv died that day, Aaron and his children were Einanim. When a Nainin is also Bekotchim. A Nainin is not allowed to eat Korban, it's not allowed to eat Kotchim. Nor Benegeya Seirizim is Soyer Nachshim, but concerning the other two, the Soyer of the Seirizim of specially for the Shmini Lemeloyim. And the Soyer of Nachshim, Hot Moshe Ongezok Vachalten. But Moshe told him that clearly told him they have to eat kichein suveisi Moshe. That's how I was commanded. And Asha explains that ba'aninus yechlu. I was commanded that even if you're a nainus, someone who's a nainus should. If you're a nainus, you have to eat these. In other words, he said there is a heter. The Eibishter gave me a heter that even though normally a nainus cannot eat kochim, but for these two, the Eibishter gave a heter and said you're allowed to eat. And automatically, if you're allowed to eat, you have to eat because these are kabbanas that they had to eat. Unless they're not allowed. But if they were allowed, Eibishter gave them a heter to eat, and therefore they had to eat it, and that's why they ate it. But concerning the third one, the Soyer of Shchedesh, there was an argument, a difference of opinion between Moshe and Aaron. What was the difference? Moshe had gehalten, as Soyer Shchedesh, sie gedarft essen Baninas. Moshe Rabbeinu thought that the third one, the Soyer Shchedesh, should have also eaten being an Einen, Punkt für die andere zwei Sirim, just like the other two Sirim. The Balzik, when I had them a Furish, if the Kabbanis from them talk, since Hashem clearly said you could eat it even if you're an Einen, and he said it concerning two Kabbanis of that day, because as we said before, because Hashem commanded them they should eat it even if they're Einers. Shemesha thought, just like Hashem said it concerning those two Kabbanis, there's a heter to eat, they should eat it. So Moshe assumed that the same thing would apply to the third one. That's why he said, complained, why didn't you eat it? You're an Einen, but the other two you ate because Hashem said this includes also. Aaron had gehalten and him geantwortet. Aaron held an answer to Moshe. Shemele shemaite dem het is all from the Gemara. Maybe you didn't hear that, means you only heard this heter, it'll be koche shor. Only karbonis which are specifically for that day. Temporary thing. The Seirizim was Sir Chatosh. That soyer for the Shmini Samiyam the soyerism as we call it, and the soyer nachshen, those two were called koche shor. Those were karbonas brought only that day. It wasn't karbonas forever, or for all generations. The seirizim was because it was the 8th day of Elohim, was the only time brought the korban. The soyer of nachshen was only a one-time thing. Every nosi brought it once, and that never happened again. So you heard that Hashem told us to eat, gave a heter to eat, even though we're anina concerning those. But concerning the koche deiris, concerning the third one, which is the soyer, the chatas of Rosh Chodesh, that's something for all generations. Every month, Rosh Chodesh, you have to bring that korban. So maybe over there, that didn't apply. Over there, the heter that David gave to eat for it doesn't apply. And he also added the ibi koche deiris. Not only that, he brought him another point. Aaron brought to Moshe, the Gemara says, another point to prove that korban, the seir of Soyer of Rosh Chodesh, they shouldn't have eaten it, not like the other two. And he said like this, I have this word, kal v'chemer ma'maiser akal. I have a kal v'chemer from maiser. Maiser is what you take off maiser from the crop that grows every year, you have to take off maiser. And maiser has a gedusha. Maiser sheni has a gedusha, you have to take it. I mean, it's holy, maiser gedusha. And the dimba maiser is that you cannot eat it as a nainen. So he said like this, Ma Meiser Hakal. Ma the Meiser, which is light. In other words, the Kedusha of Meiser is not that strict. It's a lower level of Kedusha than the Kedusha of Karbonis. Omra Teire, the Teire said, Le'yachalti beini mimeno, that when you say the video, you say there's a certain thing that you have to say in the Beis Hamikdash when you're concerning the Meiser, and you say, I did not eat it when I was an Einen, which means the Torah tells you that Einen is not allowed to eat Meiser because Meiser is holy and an Einen shouldn't eat it. So if by an Meiser, which is not just a strict Kedusha, not such a high level of Kedusha, Kal, it's lighter. The Torah said you should not eat it as an Einen because Shadeiris, Kochim, Korbanis, which is not the korban. Kodesh show the korban is that for the Hashem said special, it's special. But kodesh it's a regular korban is that you bring constantly all the years later. The kolshkin shouldn't, since it's a higher level of kedusha, you shouldn't be able to eat it as an einen. Which means kedushas meiser, which is a lower level of kedusha. Nevertheless, the Torah said as an einen don't eat it. Kedusha of korbanis avada you can't eat it, and because it's kedusha kodesh deiris. So l'chura, I shouldn't be able to eat it. And right away, Vayishma Moshe vayita beinov. Moshe heard what he said, and Moshe liked it. And the Gemara says this: Heide, he admitted to Aaron, the Leib, Moshe was not embarrassed. Leimar leishamaiti. He was not embarrassed because if he would have been embarrassed, he would have said, "I didn't hear." That's not such a big embarrassing thing. But he didn't do that. He admitted and he said, Shamaiti v'shachachti. Yes, I heard that din, I forgot. I forgot this din. I forgot that this din that you're not allowed to eat it. The kosher deiris you're not allowed to eat. That's what he answered. This is what it says in the Gemara. Darf man verstehen, the Rebbe said we have to understand. Why did Aaron have to add that you only heard it by kosher shor? By kosher deiris you didn't hear. And then he said, so you didn't hear that I'm allowed to eat it. So Aaron felt that he shouldn't eat it. It's like Karbonis. Then he brought another ayah, a Kalvachemer from Meiser. If Meiser, which is a lower level of Kedusha, Einen can't eat it, Kochim, which is a higher level of Kedusha, certainly shouldn't be able to eat, besides those two that Hashem said. But why did they have to bring that svara that we have a Kalvachemer from Meiser? If Moshe Rabbeinu would not have known this general din that you're not allowed to eat Kochim, when you're an Einen, I understand. And Aaron tried to show him, I have a proof that you're not allowed to eat Kochim when you're an Einen. The proof would be for Meiser. If Meiser, which is a lower level of Kedusha, Einen can't eat it. So if Meiser is some Kochim, which is a higher level, I certainly can't eat it. But that's not true. He didn't need that. Aaron hat doch nicht wissen gewesen, mechadisch sein Menschen, dem koloslichen Diener sein, Einen ist außer bei Kochim. Aaron was not interested in telling him, proving to him the din that an Einen can't eat Kochim. That's not what he's trying to prove. Das hat Moshe echt früher gewusst. But Moshe knew that. In this situation that was happening that day, Moshe knew. How do we see? How did Moshe know it? How do we know Moshe knew it? And where do we see he knew it? Poshet. Davor was der Eibishter hat ihm gedacht, aussagen zu wissen, hätte mir vorher, bin ich die andere Serie, the fact that the Eibishter had to tell him clearly that the other two, you're allowed to eat even your Einen, gave him heter to eat it, and Bamela had to eat as an Einen. Why did the Eibishter have to tell him? Isn't that itself a proof that if not for this heter, you wouldn't be able to eat? In other words, there he knew that an Einen can eat Kochim. And therefore, the Eibishter had to give him a special heter to eat those other kabbanas. So Moshe Rabbeinu knew that an Einen is not allowed to eat Kochim. The only thing Aaron tried to tell him that din will also apply to this case of this korban. That's all. Even though that din of an Einen not allowed to eat kochim doesn't apply to the first two, he tried to show him that it does apply to the third one. This isur of eating as an Einen, the third one, the korban from the Shchedish, the isur applies, not like the first. That's all he's trying to tell him. He's not trying to prove to him the etzem din that Einen can't eat kochim. Kedei zu matkish sein dem chilek at hetem yucha bei Einen is nor benegate the kochim show, not benegate the kochim data sorry shchedish. In order to stress, to bring out the point that there's a difference between the heter Davish gave and the other two, which is the kochim show that's korbanos, that's only for a temporary thing, a one-time thing. Is not, and there Davish said an Einen could eat it, and this one is different. So Aaron tried to show him that on this korban, the normal din that an Einen can't eat kochim, which Moshe knew, so that din will apply here too. In other words, Moshe felt that the normal din of an Einen also eat kochim doesn't apply to the third one, not only to the two, to the third one. So he thought it applies there too. That there's no iser to eat the kochim. So you should have eaten from it. Aaron tried to tell him, no, that heter only applied to those two, And the third one is like a regular. It's like an ein kachim. To change, take away from what Moshe thought, as the heter is scale ala kachim from them tog, that this heter the Davish gave to eat an ein and kachim for those two applies to all the karbonas of that day. That's what Moshe thought, and I'm trying to tell him, no, there's a difference. Is was gidot zu der kalvachemer ma'meiser akal. So what did he add by bringing kalvachemer for meiser? Keilu, if you have to bring a kalvachemer for meiser, which means it seems as if as lule the kalvachemer, what man nicht gekannt mechalek sein zwischen the kosher show and kosher deiras. That if not for the kalvachemer, you wouldn't make the difference. What does that kalvachemer proof negate the difference? There's two things. All the kalvachemer shows that you can't eat kochim while you're on einan. That's what the kalvachemer shows. That we don't need to prove. That everyone knew that. The whole discussion was, does the heter that David gave for the first two apply to this also? Moshe said it does, and Aaron said it didn't. So all Aaron had to say that you can't bring a raya, you can't prove this din, that just like the first two are mutter to eat as a name, the other one also. That's all you have to say. So what should he have done? All Aaron should have said was very short. Maybe all you heard that David there allowed an einan to eat the karbonis by the first two is only by kosher show, only karbonis, which are temporary, which means a one-time thing, that's all. The Leib kosher deiras, and not in the korban, which will always bring in all generations, which is that's all you have to say. What did he add by saying that we have a kalvachemer that you can't eat kochim when you're an einan? Kalvachemer from Isaac. That's the kasha that Rabbi says in order 14, the Sfasemis asks. Why did they have to bring that in? All you have to say, you try to say that this is different than all kochim, just like the first two, you're allowed to. This one also, I didn't try to tell them, no, you can't eat. The Abish told it to you by kocheri. Sure, those are only a temporary, only a one-time thing. You can't apply it here, that's all. And that's all he should have said. The diuk is, noch mer beilet, this question that Rebbe has is even seen more clear. Durch dem, was mir gefindt, als ich Rashi mit Perusha la Teure bring dem Teichen na Shakel v'Teire zwischen beiden Shanaren. We see Rashi in his commentary on the Teure brings the same pshat in the discussion between Moshe and Aaron. As Aaron had gesagt, dass sie do achille zwischen Kodesh Show and Kodesh Deiros, that Aaron said that there is a difference between the heter that David gave by the first two, which is Kodesh Show, only karbonis of a one-time thing, and it doesn't apply. That heter doesn't apply to Kodesh Deiros, which is Chodesh, and Moshe didn't think so. So that's what Rashi brings. He brings that discussion too. When Rashi dort is talking about and there Rashi makes it very short. Rashi says like this: when Aaron said to Moshe, "Hayita bein Hashem," you think if I would have eaten it, Hashem would have liked it. And Rashi adds, what was his logic? Im shemaita b'kodesh. When you heard that the Eibush that allowed an einan to eat the karbonis was only by the karbonis, that's a one-time thing. Eilach lahokol b'kodesh deiros. You can't, because of that, be lenient and allow it also by a korban which is kodesh deiros. Bringt in dem kalvachemer ma'meiser hakal. He doesn't bring the kalvachemer from meiser. And that makes the question we ask stronger. Why does the Gemara bring it? There's no need for it. It doesn't add anything to this discussion. It's just a proof, a separate proof, that kochim you cannot eat when you're not einan. That we don't need the proof. The only thing we want to know, is there a difference between this one and the first two or not? Moshe thought there is no difference. Aaron explained to him that there is a difference. That's all. So Rasha should, just like Rasha says that all Aaron said, you can't, just like the Eibush said by the first two that you're allowed, you should want to say allowed here, you can't say that. Maybe it's different. That's all he said to him. And that's what Rashi, so why does the Gemara say different? Now, so we'll understand it by first being a dike in the Loshen of Rashi. Rashi uses the Loshen im shemaita bekoche show that Aaron said to Moshe, if you heard this thing that the Einan could eat karbonis, you heard it concerning koche show, those karbonis which are only a one-time thing, ein loch lohokol bekoche deiros. You cannot be so lenient also by karbonis which are done constantly in all generations. That's what he said. But the Rashi uses the Loshen ein loch lohokol. You can't be lenient. In other words, Rashi looks at this inyan of a leniency to be able to eat as an einan, to be able to eat karbonis is a leniency. For Loshen Rashi ein loch lohokol, from the Rashi that you can't be lenient also by koche deiros. He didn't say to him, you can't learn out. See, simple shot, we think what Rashi means is, the Eibush told you that the Einan could eat it by koche shor. Now, koche deiros is different. How do you know it applies there too? That's a general question. How do you know it applies? So Rashi should have said the Loshen, ein loch lilmed, you can't learn out from something that David just said, a chidush that David just said in Koche Shah, should apply it also to Koche Davis. Nothing to do with a kula or a chumrah. It's only said by those. How do you know it's said by this one too? So Rashi should have written something like, yeah, ein loch lilmed, you can't learn from there. Rashi doesn't say that. Rashi says you can't learn how to be mekel. Is muchach, that proves ados was man kenit zugleichen koche dedes to koche show, that we cannot compare the korbanos that are a constant thing, not a one-time thing, to the korbanos which are a one-time thing. Is nitval the heter ninus by koche show is given a hero show from welchem me ken bechal nit oplen from mokemacher. Rashi did meant not to say that Aaron told him that Bechlal, this was a din that Eibush told you. He told it to you by those two. That's all. So you can't learn out from there to any other case. That it was only, we call it the Hero Shah. Hero Shah means something that Eibush said for that time. For this thing that Eibush said, and you can't learn out from anything else. For nothing. That's not what he was saying. Nor we see from Rashi what was the point here is he said like this. There's a reason why I think you cannot learn out the koche datus from koche show. Seems like because koche datus is more chomer, is more strict. That's why he said high time. Therefore, in shamaita be koche show, if you heard this din that you're allowed to, you heard this by koche show, ein loch lo hokel be koche datus. You can't be lenient. In other words, we talk. You're lenient. In other words, the Eibishter was lenient in this case, but koche datus could be is more strict. So the heter the Eibishter gave you here, you can't be makel by koche datus. In other words, he's feeling, Rashi feels, and this is what Arne said to him, that koche datus is more strict. And this is a heter that an Einan normally can't eat koche, but the Eibishter gave him a heter by koche show. So he said, okay, maybe he gave him koche show by koche datus, which is more strict. You can't, how do you know if you could be makel in a more lenient kedusha? How do you know you could also be lenient the same way by stricter kedusha? So Rashi learns that the kedusha of koche shah is more strict than the kedusha of koche datus. No, I'm sorry. The kedusha datus is more strict than koche shah, and therefore by koche shah they gave you a heter. How do you know that the same heter, the same kula, will apply to koche datus, which is more strict? Pizeh is moving. Now, if that's the pshat in Rashi, we'll understand. Now we'll understand why the Gemara adds something that Rashi didn't say. That Aaron told him, "I have a kal v'chemer that you should not eat. An oinen should not eat from this koche deres, araya from meiser." And the question was, what's negaya meiser? Meiser is a general din that you can't eat kochim baninas. So he says like this. Violate shitas hashasis, as the Rabbi will explain soon. The Gemara goes along with the shita. Is farkert. Rashi holds koche deres is more strict than koche shah. So maybe you can't learn out the fact that they gave you a heter by koche shah. The heter applies to koche deres also. You can't be. And the Gemara learns the opposite. Koche shah is eine chaburim for koche deres. Koche shah, anything that's a kedusha for a one-time thing, that's more strict. But for hakal should be koche deres, and certainly from something that's light in koche deres. Now the koche deres bechlal is less strict than koche shah. That's what the opposite of what Rashi says. Certainly meiser, which is in koche deres, kedusha that goes on for later generations, it's the lighter one of the kedusha of koche deres. So the Gemara learns that koche deres is less chomer than koche shah. Koche shah has a chomer. So that's why Rashi, Rebbe will explain, that's why Rashi has to add kal v'chemer m'maiser hakal. On the raya of them, the Rebbe says, I'm going to bring a raya that according to the Gemara, koche shah, something that's only a one-time thing, is more strict from a different thing. Similar in Yonim, but a different thing we see, that's the shita of the Gemara. The Gemara brings the plukta between Rabbi Yossi and Glil and the Chachamim. The Gemara brings an argument between Rabbi Yossi and Glil and the Chachamim. Benegeya the moker adin as achatas chitzena shenichnas doma lifnai v'lifnim vet posel and musfar brentfen. There's a din that if a korban chatas and you brought it into the Kedesh HaKadoshim, so, and that's called a chatas chitzena, means a chatas that you sprinkle the blood outside of the Kedesh HaKadoshim. You sprinkle it in the heichal. What happens if you brought it in? It becomes posel. and you have to burn it. Where do we know this from? So there's an argument. Rabbi Yossi Agli learned this from Posik Shiva Pasha Sayin. Rabbi Yossi Agli learns it from the Posik in Pasha Shmini. The Posik says that Moshe Rabbeinu said to Aaron when they didn't eat from the third korban, he said, "Hein lehuva es dama lakedesh pnima." The blood was not brought inside, which means Moshe had gefragt Aaron, and Moshe asked Aaron, "Favos mit dem korban chatas verbrennt?" He asked the korban chatas, that third chatas, why did you burn it? Why didn't you eat it? And he added, we didn't bring that blood inside. So the Gemara, says in the Gemara, the fact that he said that, why did you not eat it? After all, they didn't bring it inside. What does that show? Mechlal, that shows the Iyayel Domo. If the blood would have been brought in as B'sreifa, you would have to burn it. I understand why you burn it. So from that posik with Rabbi Yisrael, says we see that any korban chatas, that the blood was brought inside in the pnim, is Sreifa. Und der Fun lernt man up, auf jeder Chatos Chetzeinesh Nichnas Dom Lefnei Lefnim Adin B'Sreifa. From here we learn out that any Chatos that doesn't belong inside, and you bring it inside Lefnei Lefnim the Kedesh HaKadoshim, you have to burn it. So we know it from the posik here, which Moshe Rabbeinu said, that had they brought in this blood inside, I understand why you burn it, because you have to burn it, obviously. But the Chachamim learn of them from another posik. The Chachamim say we learn from a different posik. What's wrong? Why didn't they learn it from the same posik at Rabbi Yisrael Lili? The Rashi is Mavai. Rashi explains as ledaitom kemad this in top learner from posik hein lehuva that the Chachamim hold you cannot learn it out from this posik that Moshe said. Why? Baldeiris misholei alfinan. Because deiris, which karbonas from later, we want to learn out that karbonas chatos, all karbonas from years later, any carbon that goes inside in the fnaivel lifnim, you have to burn it. We Rabbi Yisrael learned it out from what Moshe said concerning this carbon here. So he said, but this korban was called a korban shah. From korban shah, we can't learn out korban deiris. Okay. There needs an explanation, but the Rebbe will explain in a second. And the L'chura, after the Alfinim, even though we can't learn out, the Rebbe is asking Akasha, what is this word of the Rabbanan? We can't learn out the korban, the din, that any korban chatas from all generations, if it goes inside, you have to burn it, from the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu said that if this would have been brought inside, I understand you'd have to burn it. You can't learn out from there. So the Rebbe says, okay, there's no din that you could learn out. But nevertheless, what's the svara that we should not learn it out? Not learn out. Why should it be different? Why would these things different? We're saying this was the one that we're learning it out from is Shah, and we want to learn out the chatas of deiris. How could you learn out from there? You can't learn. You don't learn out from there. But on its own, what's the svara? We should be machmer by Shah and say by Shah is more chomer. That by Shah it's more chomer. You have to burn it. But if you want to learn out, other guys you can't. The fun is mucha. From there we learn out that this is a general approach. The Chachamim hold that Kodesh Shah is more strict than Kodesh Deiris. Was therefore, by Kodesh Shah, as chata shenichnas dama lefnai lefnim is b'sreifa. Even though it says clearly in the Torah, Reish Rabbeinu said this, that by Kodesh Shah, talking about the karbonos that they brought on this day, that over there we learn clearly that if it be brought in, you have to burn it. We would think Kodesh Deiris is not like that. It's not that strict. That's what he's saying. So when he says you can't learn out Kodesh Deiris from Kodesh Shah, why? Because Kodesh Deiris, Kodesh Shah, because Kodesh Deiris is not so strict. Kodesh Shah is stricter. According to the Gemara, we see if Kodesh Shah is stricter, we can't learn out the strictness of Kodesh Shah that you have to burn it if something this type of thing happened to it. We can't learn out the same strictness to Kodesh Deiris. Maybe it's not Chayv Sreifa. That's what we see from the Gemara. So the approach here is that we see from this din, that din of the Gemara, that the Gemara holds, in other words, basically not, but the Gemara holds that here, that Kodesh Shah is stricter than Kodesh Deiris. And therefore, we can't say that just like by Kodesh Shah, that it's so strict that you have to burn it, in the case you have to burn inside, the same thing Kodesh Deiris. So we see that from the Gemara. But I have to mention, and that's negated to the Sikha further, it's an interesting thing we shouldn't confuse. Till now we were using this with the whole discussion here, but Negea Aaron not eating the korban Moshe was upset. It's the Soyer Shchedesh. Now, in our Gemara, in our din that we're talking from the whole Sikha here, the Soyer Shchedesh is called Kochederis. The other one, the other two, which is only a one-time thing, is called Kocheshah. Now, in this Gemara, we're using the word Kocheshah to this korban. Because where did Moshe Rabbeinu say that had you brought it inside, you would have been Chai B'Srei for you? I understand why you burned it. He's talking concerning this Soyer Shchedesh. And the Gemara refers to it as Kochesh, as Kedusha Koche. We say this, this korban, Kocheshah. We want to learn out other chatois. If you take it inside, you have to burn it from this. And the Chachamim hold you can't learn out from this. This is Kocheshah. When it's Kocheshah, we just referred to it before as Kochederes. It's the Soyer of Shchedesh. The Shchedesh is something different. So the Rebbe will explain, bring from Taisvis. Taisvis says the word Shah and Deres here mean a little different than there. Before we were talking Kocheshah and Kochederes. Kochederes means anything that will be done later generations. Kocheshah means something that David said, now do it now. On the other hand, from a different angle, the Soyer of Rosh Chodesh is also called Kocheshah, not because the Soyer of Rosh Chodesh is Kocheshah, because that's something that David said then. But what we're trying to learn out is the general idea, everything in its own point, that according to the Gemara, Kocheshah is more strict. And the Gemara says, the Soyer of Rosh Chodesh, from a certain angle, it has to do with Kocheshah. It was this whole din that David said. What happened that day is something special he said that day. It's a Shah. So we see Kocheshah is stricter than Kochederes. The Rebbe says, and we'll also read it further inside. Nochmed, the Kavana in Shah dort is need the Kocheshah kipshutam. In that Gemara with Rabbi Yisrael and the Chachamim, the word Kocheshah is not simple pshat Kocheshah. That means, because hey, Kavana was at Makar again, blazing on that side, Kavana is that you only brought then. That's what we've been saying the whole time, Kocheshah means. When the Korban welchem verbrennt, you give then a Soyer Shchedesh now, because the Korban that was burned. And Moshe Rabbeinu said, had you brought it inside, I understand why you burned it. That was according to Rosh Chodesh. And Rosh Chodesh is called, as we said till now, Kochederes, because it's all generation. Here is different. Rabbi Teisus is Mavayir. Teisus says, when it says Kocheshah, it means you can't learn Ashah from Deres, means Heira Ashah. Heira Ashah in Kochederes. It's like a Kochederes. It's Rosh Chodesh. It was the Soyer Rosh Chodesh. But a special din that was said concerning the Korban Rosh Chodesh. So comes out as later Chacham is an Yonah Shah at the Kachamurim from Yonah Deres. According to Chacham, anything has to do with a Shah, a certain time, is so much stricter than something that goes on for Deres, as a feel from Shah Shebekotch Deres. Even though we're talking about the Soyer Shchedesh, which is Kotch Deres. But if it's a Hero Shah, something that has to do with the time being a specific time, which is the Soyer Shchedesh from Shmini Lemloyim, Kemenit Oplenen. From there, you can't learn out. While Z is Chamura from Kotch Deres time, because it has a connection to a special Shah, it has a Chumre. So certainly, as Kotch Shah Mamesh, there's Soyer Izim, Soyer Nachshin. So certain, the real Kotch Shah, which is the Karbonis that were only brought at that time, no other times. So in the Chamurim for Kotch Deres, it's more Chomer than Kotch Deres. So the bottom line is, it comes out that from the Gemara we see that anything that has to do with Shah is more Chomer than Kotch Deres. Over there, we're talking about Shah as a Hero Shah, and you can't learn out something for Deres from Hero Shah. But we're using that same thing here, that Korban, that's a Korban of only a Korban Shah, which is a Korban of Nachshin and the Korban of the Soyer of the Shmini Lemiluyim, because is more Chomer than the Soyer of Rosh Chodesh, which is really a Kotch Deres, because it's something that goes on further. So this is what the Gemara holds. So it's different than Rashi. We said before, Rashi holds that Kotch Deres are more Chomer than Kotch Shah. And Rebbe said that the Gemara holds, Gemara goes with the Shita, the opposite. The Kotch Shah is more strict than Kotch Deres. We bald as Kotch Shah is Zainal Shita Ashas Chamurim and Kotch Deres, since according to the Gemara, Kotch Shah is stronger than Kotch Deres. Can in Gemara nicht stehen, Im Shemaite be Kotch Shah Elach Lahakal be Kotch Deres. So what Rashi says, the Gemara couldn't say. The Gemara couldn't say that if you heard that by Kotch Shah, that the Eibishter said that you should eat it even on the Neinen, you can't be Mekel by Kotch Deres. Well, Adarabbe, according to the Gemara, it's opposite. By Kotch Shah, Chamurim is do the Kulov and Heter Achilles be Aninus. According to the Gemara, that Kotch Shah is more Chomer. And if by Kotch Shah, Nevertheless, you're allowed to eat it as an einen. The lachas kama v'kama is the kula terheter achile baninas. Banin sichlu is chalav the kosher deiris shebeis maimed. So certainly it should be on kosher deiris. He wanted to say you can't be makel by kosher deiris. We makel. Fakert. Kosher deiris is less cool. If you were makel by kosher shah, which is a stricter kedusha, according to the Gemara, certainly should be makel by kosher deiris. So the Gemara couldn't say like Rashi that if you were makel by kosher shah, you can't be makel by kosher deiris because kosher deiris is more chomer. According to the way Rashi learns in Pshuta Shel Mikro, it's more chomer. The Farat Aaron gemusst meisiv sein. Aaron had to add another svara. See, according to Rashi, he said this svara very good. Since kosher deiris is more chomer, so the fact that there's a kula by kosher shah that you could eat it as an einen, can't bring a rai for kosher deiris. But he had to add something else. So what did he add? Ibe kosher deiris kal v'chemer meiser akal. I have a svara from meiser. Meiser is definitely kal. Meiser is definitely the lower level of kedusha. Since we find that this iser that an einen can't eat it is found even by Meiser. Meiser's kedusha is not that great. Kemenik mekel zay baninis bekotche deiris to chorplan from kotche shah. So mele you can be mekel by an einen by kotche deiris by learning it from kotche shah. The rest is mistaber to zogen makes sense. That heter aninis given ahira shah blaze benegay kotche shah. The kind of toplin. Since we find this concept that aninis is oser by afila by Meiser, so really it should be oser. Elama you found that the Eibishter was mekel by the kotche shah. So he says that Abish is mekel by kosher shah, but what's the raya that you could be mekel by kosher deiris? In other words, it's no raya from there to here, and we see how strict this din of aninas is. That even by meiser, which is a dusha kalo, it's a lower level. That din of aninas is so strict that you can't eat even meiser. So al piseichel makes sense that you shouldn't be able to eat it even by kosher deiris. But the raya is from meiser. Not because it's like Rashi says, but the rise from Meiser, all Meiser shows the strictness of Aninas. The moment we have the strictness of Aninas, so we stick to where the heter was. The fact that you're allowed to eat as an Ein Kochim is a heter. It's a heter. Now we find the heter by Koche Shah, but not by Koche Deiris. Because Koche Deiris and Koche Shah is stricter, but it's no Raya. So you can't be makel by Koche Deiris by learning it from Koche Shah. Because you see by Meiser, see how strict it is. Even by Meiser, you can't. So Mele is mistaber. The Rebbe says to say that the heter of being an einen that he should be able to eat is something special. The Rebbe only said it by Koche Shah, not by Koche Meiser, not by Koche Deiris. In other words, even though Koche Shah, according to and Koche Shah, Koche Deiris, Koche Shah, I mean, according to Rash, the Gemara, is stricter. But nevertheless, it's not a kal v'chemer, but nevertheless, even though Bakotche Shah is stricter according to the Gemara, and nevertheless the Torah was matir, true, but the fact that we see the strength of the Isra of Aninas, so there to matir the Isra of Aninas by Kochim needs a real raya. We find it by Koche Shah. To say that it's also by Koche Deiris is also the heter. So even though you might think a kal v'chemata by Koche Shah, which is stricter, and the Torah was a matir, certainly Koche Deiris also, according to the Gemara, because Koche Shah is stronger. But we have a riot how strong Aninas is. It's from the other side. The Isra of Aninas is strong. We see it from Meiser. So therefore, it makes sense to say that by Koche Shah that the Torah was matir. By Koche Shah the Torah was matir. Is only a din there, but by Koche Deiris we have no raya. In other words, the fact that we learn it out from Meiser is just to teach us the strength of the din of Aninas, which b'meila you need a special heter in every case. And the fact that the was matir by Koche Shah is no raya too different. It must be a psa hirosh or something that David said at that time. Anyway, so the bottom line is that the machlekes, we call it machlekes, between the way the Gemara learns and the way Rashi learns, is according to Rashi. Koche Deiris is stricter than Koche Shah, and according to Gemara, Koche Shah is stricter than Koche Deiris. Bleibt aber nicht moving, not understand. Was ist die Asboras apluktet zu Koche Deiris eine Merchoma Kshitas Rashi, if you Risha Latera, the Koche Shah Kshitas Tashas. What's the reason behind this argument? That Rashi learns the Koche Deiris is more strict, and Gemara learns that kosher show is more strict. The Shleimer is the Rebbe said the pshat a different pshat. The plukt is not was is mer chomer. It's not like we said before that argument is which one is stricter. Nor was var asu kosher show is lo given. The argument is in the kosher show itself. Is this a type of kosher show which is stricter or not? That's what it is. The shaila is, can you learn out from kosher show to kosher deiros? The shaila is, what kind of gather does the kosher show here in this case have? And that will be a machlekes. Is that stricter than the kosher deiros, or is that not strict? And the Rebbe says like this, because in kosher show, in kosher show, there are two ways, two types. Kosher show stam chat pomi mamish. You have kosher show meaning something that was done a one-time thing. It's not the same as a korban that's ledeiros. It's something a one-time thing and finished. Alderek karbonos from Leo Carmel. Leo brought karbonos and Hara Carmel, and he was allowed to. So there, here it makes sense that it's kosher show. It's only for a one-time thing, and that should be less strict than kosher deiros. In the dugman now, like in this example, but by karbonos Elio Hara Carmel mate given ach the miser from shchut chutz. But what Elio did, the Alpinavua was mutter to him to bring a korban outside of the Beis Hamikdash, which is a niser. We don't find that by other karbonos. So obviously that's a one-time thing, and it's kal. So normally it's kal. It's not. It's more lenient. So kosher show normally is more lenient. But that's one type of kosher show. Something that you bring a one-time thing, and that's it. Kosher show. There's a second way kosher show was kosher zeirakrove bepeil blaze beisha show. That even though that you bring it a one-time thing, true. Is in Yonah v'teichen apula l'deiros, but the teichen of what this is supposed to accomplish is something that affects all generations. Al derech with the karbonos from the Yemei HaMiluyim was a machanach ben the Mishkan, just like the karbonos of the Yemei HaMiluyim that was dedicating the Mishkan. So they did it a one-time thing, but that had an effect forever. Al derech karbonos hanisim the Chanukas HaMizbeach. So too when they dedicated the Mizbeach, the Nisim, it's a one-time thing. Every Nossi brought it once and never again. But this had an effect on the whole future. So it's kosher show, but the kosher show that affects all the generations. When their suk from kosher show is can move mer chomer b'stam kosher deiros, and this type of kosher show is more strict than regular kosher, even kosher deiros. But kosher deiros, weil durch sie wird aufgetan in sie seinen tluyim in yonim l'deiros, because what they accomplish and what depends on them is the deiros. See, a regular kosher deiros means that all generations you do it. All times, it's a din of all generations. But every time you do it, it's something that's done for it at that time. Here we're talking that it was done one time, but it affects all generations. Well, there is a benitten the danguf in our case gufa, but negate them soyerism and soyer nachshon. Let's say the first two karbonos, the soyer of the Yemei HaMiluyim, soyer seirism, and the soyer of nachshon. The gather from kosher show came by zezayin of tzvayifan. Here we could learn that it's one of the two ways. We said there are two types. What type of kosher show was here? Well, how could you learn two ways? So the Rebbe says like this. But first we have to give a Hagdam introduction. This chakla v'tarya do is not in gezer akrova gab mizbeach. Nor bang achilas ken. We're not talking here when they brought on the mizbeach. They did bring all the karbonos on the mizbeach. Even this one. The question is about eating it. They didn't eat it. When in them when it comes to the discussion of eating, what concept is, what teichen is there in the eating of this korban of Rosh Chodesh? You could think, see, is the eating of the Kehanim also part of dedication of the Mishkan and the Mizbeach, which is Negeil to all generations? Al derech hapshat, according simple, which is the derech of Rashi, leitzich, makes sense to say, as achilas b'nei odam haKehanim hot mit k'shayches mit chinuch haMishkan Mizbeach. The eating of the Kehanim, which is the eating of human beings, has no connection to the dedication of the Mishkan and the Mizbeach. Why? So, certainly the korban that brought as one of the Shmini Leib. It's a korban connected to the dedication of the days of Miluyim, which was the dedication of bringing down the Shechina into the Mishkan. Is doch demol b'shas achilas asorish and given noch dem v'ti karbonos v'narlach shnuf geton durch der akrov el hamizbeach dem chinuch. The eating of the korban was already after they were makrivet. And being makrivet brought down the Shechina. Oh, now after that they had to eat it, but the Shechina came down already. before they ate it, before they were supposed to eat it. B'shleimuse, completely, atish the Shechina b'chem, it says the Shechina rested there. U'mateicha eish m'lifnei Hashem v'teichel al mizbeach, the fire came down and ate up by the mizbeach. B'meila is the achilas kenim shelach, as a tutnitu b'china chamishka mizbeach l'deiris. So eating after the korban accomplished what it was supposed to bring down the Shechina, etc. Now that you eat it, that's a separate issue. It makes sense. That's already after you accomplish what you're supposed to accomplish. Now, it's an eating of a korban. It has nothing to do with the future. It has nothing to do with the dedication of the Mizbeach. So that's concerning the one that was connected to Yemei HaMeluyim, which is the day to bring down the Shechina. Feel is soyer nachshen, even the second one, which is the soyer of nachshen. Was mit dem is given the aschole from the 12th tag from the Chanukas HaMizbeach durch the Korbanos Nesim. This is the first one. That was the beginning of what the Korbanos of the Nesim had to accomplish. So here you might think the eating of it is still the middle of what's supposed to happen to the Mishkan. Is overlaten. Derech Pshat Mistaver, according to Pshat, it makes sense. That the Chanukas HaMizbeach is verbunden mit der Akrova Gaba Mizbeach b'Mishkan. That these Korbanos, which are the Chanukas HaMizbeach, the Nesim, their Korbanos is the dedication of the Mizbeach, has to do with bringing the Korbanos on the Mizbeach, aber nicht mit der Achilas HaKehanim. Not with the fact that the Kehanim ate. What the Kehanim ate is separate inyan. So it comes out as like Pirish Rasha Lateire, according to Rasha, which goes according to Pshat, comes out is the Achilas Kehanim from the Kodesh Shor, nicht negei l'deiros. That the eating of the Kehanim by the Kodesh Shor means the korban of the Miluyim, the soyer, the Seirizim, and the korban of Nachshen. The eating of the Kehanim has nothing to do with later generations. That's a one-time thing. It says, "Dos is in the Mershon Suga Nal in Kodesh Shor." It comes out that the eating of these karbanos is the first category of Kodesh Shor. That's lighter. That's not as strict as Kodesh Deiros. But Mela, Beloshan Rasha, Mela, according to Rasha, it fits. Im Shemaita, Mesha said it like this: if you heard by Ninitzichlud that you're allowed to eat it as an einen by Kodesh Shor, which is kal, Kodesh Shor is kal, is lighter. Eilach lahokol b'Kodesh Deiros achmurim. You can't be mekel by Kodesh Deiros achamurim. You can't be making the same thing by Kodesh Deiros, which is more chomer. Because Kodesh Deiros is more chomer. Why is it more chomer? That makes sense that Kodesh Deiros has a chomer, and Rasha learns that too. As we're learning now, Rasha learns that Kodesh Deiros is more chomer, and as we said before. But the Kodesh Shor is less chomer. B'meila, that's what he said. If you heard the kule by Kodesh Shor, which is lighter, you can't apply that to Kodesh Deiros, to the ones that are Kodesh Deiros. Mashenk and them limit al derech halacha, but in halacha is kishem v'megifin b'negeder kapora shel der korban. As kenim eichlem b'aylam eskaprim in korban, we find that the kenim eat every time they eat. It brings a kapora for the yid who brings the korban. So al derech says al derech halacha b'negei alle pulas from korban. Same thing by anything that's done by the korban. Keil the pulas hakarbon has been eaten done, including what we're doing now. Chinuch hamishkma mizbeach, that the eating does have to do to the dedication. The achilas kenim is their mit verbunden und peil b'zeh. Achilas kenim do have a connection to it. So according to the Gemara, comes out as if the achilas kenim from seirizim is mitzoyer nachshen is negei l'deiros. That the kenim's eating, this was the whole question here, of the seirizim and the soyer of nachshen is important for all generations. The Fari Shitas Ashas as the Kodesh Shor like the Merchomer Kodesh Deiros, that this Kodesh Shor normally Kodesh Deiros is stricter, but here the Kodesh Shor is stricter because the Kodesh Shor is not just Kodesh Shor; it's Kodesh Shor that has to do the Deiros. The Fari Tarn gedarft onkom zu Kal Chemer Meiser Akal Kednai. That's why he had to come a different ayah. Why in this case you should? It's right that he did indeed. But you can bring a raya from the fact that by the Kodesh Shor, because Kodesh Shor were very strict in this case. The Kodesh Shor a one-time thing, but a one-time thing it has to do to all generations. While Kodesh Deiros, like the korban of Rosh Chodesh, which is Kodesh Deiros, has nothing to do with all generations. Each time it has to do with that day, that time you bring it. So therefore, he had to bring a different raya, the raya for Meiser. For Meiser, we see, as we said before, the strictness of Aninos, that even by Maisa, which is not such a great Kedusha, you're not allowed to do it. So here we would assume that you're not allowed to eat the korban by Kochim. Just like if by Maisa you don't eat Baninas, lower level of Kedusha, so by Kochim, Avadi you can. Then be Roman and Chiluk zwischen Shittas Hashas and Shittas Rasha Pirush Alatei and Taina Sar. And based on what we just said now, in the difference between the way Rasha learns and the way the Shas learns, but Nech Verstehen dem Shinu B'Neim and Gele Dos Meshe will understand the difference in Meshe admitting. It says Vayishma Meshe Beita Vein. The Meshe heard and he was satisfied. In Gemara says, as we said before, he wasn't embarrassed, and Mele he would say, I never heard this. He admitted, I heard it and I forgot. Aber Meshe is given by Shikris. Come according to the Gemara, Meshe forgot something. Schenke Rasha Pirush Alatei bringt in the Loshen Hashas. Rasha doesn't bring that Loshen. But Al Derech Loshen Tes Teras Kenim, a different Loshen, like it says Teras Kenim. He wasn't embarrassed, and he said, I didn't hear. Also, that's the Mailet, that he wasn't embarrassed to say, I didn't hear. Das Pashas Loshen Rashi is begeret amo Baruch as Meshe hat sich nicht geschämt zu sagen, dass hat Chilik für Kotsche Show und Kotsche Deres nicht gehört von Nebischen. Aber es war nicht ein Geschicke. Konnte Rashi didn't forget anything. He could have been embarrassed to say, I didn't hear from Debish that difference. Aaron told him there's a difference between Kotsche Show and Kotsche Deres. And he said, you're right, I didn't hear that difference. I don't know that difference. He didn't forget anything. He just didn't realize this difference. What's the difference between Rashi and Gemara? Leib Rashi and the Gemara goes according to their own opinions. Leib the Yisod for Narn is blazer Kalvachem Meiser Akal. According to the Gemara, that what was the Yisod of Arden, that in this case the right for not eating it is based on the Kalvachemer from Meiser. Because Be'emes Arden would have admitted himself, because this Kosher Shah here is more chomer. Why is this Kosher Shah more chomer? Because this Kosher Shah is negated to all generations. So if it's more chomer, see who had been made there, that he should have eaten it. If Kosher Shah, which is more chomer, you don't eat it, Kosher Shah. So while ich making am darf essen so Mikolishkin for Kosher Shah chamurim. If Kosher Shah they ate it, so I would have admitted. If Kosher Shah, which is more chomer, in this case Kosher Shah is more chomer, and there they Abish said to eat it, he would have said yes. So this one, which is not so chomer, because it's only datas, but not a negaya to all generation like I said before, you should have eaten. Aaron would have agreed. The only reason Aaron didn't agree because it's Havaraya from the Meiser. We see how strong the Sisar Rabbaninus is. Okay. So because of that, so according to the Gemara, we have to say, Ados was Moshe hat milchatchila gehalten anders. Why did Moshe think differently? He didn't think of that limit for Meiser. Since according to the Gemara, the only way Arne felt that he's right because of we learn out from Meiser Akal. So he didn't think of it. That's called forgetting. It's Moshe when the vergessen dem Din. Moshe Rabbeinu forgot this din the limit for Meiser. This is something he should have thought of and he didn't think of it. In other words, that's called forgetting. Moshe had a good head. It didn't come to his mind. He forgot this. He forgot that din, that you can make a kal v'chemer. It makes sense. Schenkel Pirish Rasha Lateir is der Chilik zwischen der Kasak Beitach Shemesh und das Haaren gewinnt ein von Svare. According to Rasha, what was the argument? Not in a din. Do we make the kal v'chemer or don't we make the kal v'chemer? According to the Gemara, that's the difference. Aaron said we make this kal v'chemer. Moshe said, you know what? I forgot that kal v'chemer. But according to Rashi, it's not a kal v'chemer, it's a svara. Moshe gehalt not the heter and is verbunden mit dem Tag. Moshe felt that this Adebish said by the first two that you could eat is not negated to those two dafke, it's negated to the day. Al Shmini Meluim, since the day Shmini Meluim, you have to eat it even your anoinen. B'meili is in them the Tokeh Chilitz Vishin Kotche Shah and Kotche Deiresh. And Moshe felt, why would he make a difference? He felt that just like the Kotche Shah, you're allowed to eat as an anoinen, Kotche Deiresh you're also allowed, because it's negated today. Shmini Meluim is a special day. When Nan came to say, that is nor if the karbonis michod from them that this din is only concerning those karbonis that have to do the special karbonis of Yemei Maluim, and not from the Shchedesh. Ober miken, there are finite makel zayin by Soyer Shchedesh, which is from Kotche Deiris, but you can't be makel by Soyer Shchedesh, which is Kotche Deiris. So Moshe Rabbeinu, the shaila was here is the shaila of a svore. A svara, can we apply it or not? Can we make it? Aaron felt the svara is that it has to do with all the carbonas of the day, and Moshe felt no, it only has to do with those two. Okay. The Fazok and Rash, and the Moshe realized that Aaron was right. But the Moshe, when Moshe agreed to Aaron, Rash Zoknit as by Moshe given Shikh Moshe forgot. He didn't forget anything. He just didn't think of that svara. Weil if a svara passt nicht sagen, Shikche und der Fahrer sagt man Hepach svara. You can't say a person there's a svara, a right svara. He forgot the right svara, and therefore he said the opposite svara, and then he reminded him. It's not forgetting. You can't forget Nadin. You can forget the halacha. And it's der Salma halacha. It says halacha was forgotten mamish. But es hat nicht genutzt zu sagen, I'm not vergessen das svara. No, you can't say you forgot the svara. You can machen a toz with svara, but not Shikche. You can make a mistake. The swara is, but the word shikha to say you forgot, swara you don't forget. You could say you didn't realize the swara, you made a mistake, you thought the other swara. No, the truth of Shemikrat, Meshik is up Shemaiti. Erod from the Mebish Nidgerd and Chiluk. All the answer was I didn't hear that chiluk, I didn't hear that difference. That's why he didn't say I forgot. I didn't forget. He just I didn't think, I didn't hear of this difference. So according to the Gemara, that it's in the Gay and Meshik didn't realize the din. So it means that's called forgetting. That's a din that he should have thought of. But it's not a word svara, it's a din. From Meiser Akal, Kal V'chemer. But here it's not a Kal V'chemer. Here it's is it like something that you think of the day, or is something that has to do with these special karbonas? So Mela here, Rasha doesn't say forgot. And everything you have to take out a lesson in the service of a person to the Eibishter. The law that we learn from what we said before, in Avedis, certain things are similar to called koche sho, kochim, temporary kochim, let's say, or something that's for a time being. So from what we said before, we see how much you have to be careful in that. There are certain things in the service of Hashem by Yid, which are called koche deres, which means in yonim kavuyim certain things that all generation that doesn't change, and that's what you have to do. Certain things are called koche show, new things. That proper talmid and proper tzaddikim are able to make takonis. Takonis Gdei Yisrael was because of the time. Certain things are needed, and they make certain new dinim. Like it says in Gemara, mitzvah biko motzah v'goder beged. It says Rav came to a place and he found a valley, which means he found a low thing. There's certain things that people were not careful, so he made new takonis because of the situation in that place. So there's something called koche shor, something at the time requires it. In these Achim and Welchem and is eingeweiht mit der, and those things that you're used to in all generations, it's not so hard to overcome the Yitzhahara. Because we passed already this concept of all beginnings are hard, because the beginnings were a long time ago. So it's easier to overcome. The Yisayrim is a Hegel, Masatev, not only that, if you keep on doing it, it becomes your habit, and your habit becomes your nature. So it's automatically part of you, so it's harder for the Yitzhahara to convince you. But those Avedis, which come like it's a Rebbe, a Tzaddik, comes, makes a new takone. There, stellt sich the Yitzhahara, but take it again. There, the Yitzhahara comes very strong against. He says, why? It's a new thing. What's the day different than yesterday? On them Chiddush. Our fathers did not have this Chiddush. They didn't do it. He says, the Yitzhahara makes himself like he's the leader, and he could tell you what we need. He says, who says you need this? That's what he says. When it comes to a new Aveda, you have to be very careful. Certainly, if it's something that happened, a new thing, but it's made at this time, but will affect all generations later. So you have to be more careful, more than the regular Avedas that you constantly do, which is like Koche Deira. So Koche Shah needs more care. This we learn not from the way the Gemara learns. Those was the Koche Shah gegessen baninas, and the Koche Sheiras verbrennt, that the Koche Shah they ate baninas, even though they were in them. The Koche Deiras they didn't eat. So we see that this was Blaze Ahiros Shah of Yenem Tog. This is only for now. But the Seder Rogel darf sein verkehrt nicht. The normal way to do it is the opposite. Koche Shah seine schwerer. Ubemela harbe wie Koche Deiras. Koche Shah normally, the regular Koche Shah is stricter and harder than Koche Deiras. I feel it dort with the Koche Deiras megbenessen that even if Koche Deiras, which like in our case, you're allowed to eat. In this case, it wasn't. Koche Deiras is the Soirish Chedish, which they didn't eat. But this was a special case. Is mashman that normally that even kosher deiros where you're allowed to eat is noch nicht kein raya. Me ken essen kosher show. Kosher deiros you could eat, but it's no raya. You could eat kosher. If you look there, that wasn't the case. There, David just said specifically that day you should eat the kosher show. But normally we see it should work the opposite. And even if you could eat kosher deiros, but kosher show, don't eat. Don't eat. Be careful. And we find by the karbonos habeluim, we find in the karbonos of the other karbonos. Der erste korban was Aaron hat gebracht par lechatas. Not the korban we're talking about now. The first korban that he bought was a par lechatos. Hat nicht gegessen. The achatas, he didn't eat it. Like the regular chatas of generations later. Nor tisra beis, David said burn it. But kosher deiros, with the Yitzhara stellt sich nicht an kegen atke dekach. Kosher deiros, with the Yitzhara doesn't fight you so much. Käme sich verginnen dem teinig von achilles hakorban. You could allow yourself to have pleasure from eating it. In welchen as you have pleasure. Der Guf hat der Hano von Hano beteiligt. The body has Hano. So you could allow it because you don't be so careful to stay away from it so much because you could get too much involved in Gashmis. Schenke by Koche Show by welch the Yitzhara tut be Yeseref leval b'chol by Koche Show, but the Yitzhara does much more to confuse you. So you have to be very careful when it comes to eat it. Because when you come to eat, even though it's a korban, but the Rebbe in Orah 40 says that even by korbanos we find that the Torah says there is perish chagechem, that there is some kind of like waste that could come, some kind of gropkeit that could come from eating the korbanos, eating the things of mitzvahs and things like that. So when it comes to kosher show, there you have to be careful. Der fehlt an eigenem Geschmack, befrat gufni, when you start feeling your personal pleasure, especially bodily pleasure, then you allow your Yitzhara to come in. You got to be very careful. Whereas you have to burn the korban, which means it has to be completely bought. Und das ist der Rolle Meise bei der Reine Zeh. The Meise, in actuality, in reality, what is the lesson like this? According to all the signs in the end of Masechta Seite, we are now in the generations of the heels of Mashiach. Mamish. The Friedrich Rebbe said he's standing behind the wall already. It says there are windows and there are cracks in the wall already. So he's the Drisha Shashor, since something new now. So what's expected now is to machen sein sich mit der ganzen Zwiebel der Kabbalah von Mashiach und Kenya. Der Avede ist Sakanu Avede. Our main job is to prepare ourselves to receive Mashiach. Davon wissen, so we have to know, as in der Avede darf man haben Asiris. Kele Ziris, you have to be very careful, you have to be very involved in this Avede. Und sie muss getan werden mit dem ganzen Messiah, in the Sinne Bechol Meitch, you have to do it with giving yourself over completely. And es redt sich, wenn Kotche data, we're talking about kosher data, which were, as we said before, represents the general Aveda that you always did. That you could do normally, you go with a Seder, you do it in a normal way. You don't have to lose your whole Metzias. You could even have your own Tainik, Geschmack, Saguf, Ma mitzvahs. Your body could have pleasure from the mitzvah. You could love it as Hashem, or you could do it to serve Hashem, but you're doing something that your body has anoah, which is dangerous if you get involved. But it's not so bad. But we're talking about something that's specifically now, which is the union of preparing yourself for Mashiach. You have to remember this is something that is the time now, but it's and it pushes away everything else. But if you put yourself in beyond limitations. Diesen wird den ganzen reingetan, and then you have to put yourself completely in it. Business wird verloren, the eigene Metzias. Your whole private Metzias personal gets lost. Like burning the korban. You shouldn't eat it. That means you should burn it. Same thing here. Don't eat it. Don't have connect your pleasure, your physical pleasure to it. You gotta be very careful because it's so important. Und das Gerufe bringt Mashiach. This itself will bring Mashiach. Was sein Kommen is naiven von Hesach Hadas. Mashiach is coming is in a way that you forget about him. The Gemara says that there are three things, in order 45 that Rebbe brings, three things that come by not thinking about it, and one of them is Mashiach. And the Rebbe teaches, what does it mean, Hesach Hadas? So, Hesach Hadas, when you don't think about it, all of a sudden he'll come. Chassidus says it's L'maylam B'chinas Das. It's a concept that is so great, higher than your limitations of Das. That's what the Mashiach is, which is similar to a Metziah. That's why And the Gemara quotes the posting, Matzosi David Abdi. I found David, which is Mashiach. Matzosi. It's something that's beyond your das. It's something that goes beyond your limitations. And that will happen. Begula Amitis Vashlema, Bimheira, Biyameinu Mamish.